At my wife's military school graduation dinner I paid for, she thought it'd be funny to introduce me like this. Meet my husband. No degree, no plan, just living off my income. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I smiled, raised my glass, and said, "Enjoy it. This is the last joke you'll ever make at my expense." Then I walked away, quietly, reclaiming my peace. I still remember the weight of the fork in my hand when she said it. Not because I was gripping it too hard, though I might have been, but because in that single moment, the entire room seemed to tilt, and the only thing keeping me anchored to reality was the cool metal pressing into my palm. We were seated at the head table, white tablecloths, candles flickering in crystal holders, the kind of place where the servers wear gloves and you're never quite sure which fork to use first. The kind of place I'd picked specifically because I wanted her night to be perfect. Her graduation dinner, her achievement, her moment. I'd made the reservation 3 months in advance, called in a favor to get the private room, paid the deposit from an account she didn't know existed, using money she'd never asked about because she'd stopped asking about a lot of things a long time ago. The guest list was hers, her classmates from the military academy, her commanding officers, her family, her friends from before she enlisted. 23 people total, not counting us. I knew exactly 4 of them by name before that night. The rest were strangers who smiled at me with that particular brand of polite distance you reserve for someone who doesn't quite belong. She was radiant. That's the word everyone kept using. Radiant in her dress uniform, metals catching the light every time she moved. Her hair pulled back in that severe bun that somehow made her look both softer and sharper at the same time. She'd worked for this, bled for it, in some cases, literally. I'd seen the bruises, held ice packs to her ribs, listened to her cry into my shoulder after 18-hour days that broke her down and rebuilt her into something I sometimes didn't recognize. But I was proud. God, I was so proud. That's what made it worse. She stood to give her speech about halfway through the main course, some kind of duck preparation that probably cost more per plate than most people spend on groceries in a week. The servers had just cleared the appetizer dishes, moving with that synchronized efficiency that comes from years of expensive training. And someone clinked a glass, then another. Then the whole room was doing it, a crystalline chorus, calling her to her feet. She stood, and the room quieted, and she smiled that smile I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago when she was just a sophomore with big dreams and a scholarship she'd earned by being better than everyone else. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice steady and clear in that way she'd learned to project across parade grounds and through chaos. "This journey hasn't been easy. It's tested me in ways I never imagined. But I couldn't have done it without support, without people believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." She paused for effect. She'd always been good at that, knowing exactly when to let silence do the heavy lifting. "I especially want to thank my husband for organizing this beautiful dinner. That's when I should have known." The way she said, especially. The way her eyes didn't quite meet mine when she gestured in my direction. The way a few people at the table closest to us exchanged glances I pretended not to see. I should have known. In fact, why don't you all meet him properly? She turned toward me, and her smile widened, and 23 pairs of eyes followed her gesture. "This is my husband. No degree, no plan, just living off my income." The laughter started somewhere in the back. A low chuckle, uncertain at first, like someone testing whether it was okay to laugh at a joke they weren't sure was a joke. Then someone else joined in. Then someone else. Within seconds, the entire room was laughing. Not the polite, restrained laughter of a formal dinner, but the kind of genuine, surprised laughter that comes from something truly unexpected and supposedly funny. Her commanding officer, a colonel with a chest full of ribbons and eyes like a hawk, actually slapped the table. Her mother, sitting 3 seats down from me, covered her mouth but couldn't hide the way her shoulders shook. Her best friend from the academy, a woman I'd cooked dinner for half a dozen times, laughed so hard she had to dab at her eyes with her napkin. Everyone was laughing. Everyone except me. I smiled. I have no idea how I managed it, but I smiled. The same smile I'd perfected over the past 3 years whenever she made little comments about my situation. The same smile I'd worn to her promotion ceremony when her father asked me, loudly enough for half the room to hear, what I did with my time. The same smile I'd plastered on during family dinners when her brother, the investment banker, made jokes about staying relevant in a changing economy while looking directly at me. It's amazing what you can hide behind a smile if you practice enough. I set down my fork, carefully, deliberately, the kind of movement that probably looked calm from the outside but took every ounce of control I had left. Then I picked up my wine glass. Everyone was still laughing, some of them were starting to clap, as if the humiliation of her spouse was an achievement worth celebrating, as if reducing me to a punchline in front of 24 strangers was just another medal she'd earned. I stood. The laughter didn't stop immediately. It tapered off in waves, starting with the people closest to me, who noticed the change in the atmosphere first. Within a few seconds, the room was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, like everyone had suddenly realized they might have laughed at something they shouldn't have. I raised my glass. To my wife, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. Congratulations on your graduation. You've accomplished something truly remarkable. She smiled again, clearly thinking this was my way of playing along, of being a good sport, of letting her have her moment, even if it meant sacrificing my dignity as the price of admission. I looked her directly in the eyes. Enjoy this dinner. Enjoy the laughter. Enjoy the joke. I paused, just like she had, letting the silence stretch. Because this is the last one you'll ever make at my expense. Then I walked away, not stormed out, not made a scene, just walked. Set down my glass, pushed back my chair with careful precision, and walked out of that private room with my head up and my hands steady. Behind me, I heard the silence shatter into confused whispers. Someone called my name. I think it was her mother, though I didn't turn around to check. Someone else said something I couldn't make out, and underneath it all, I heard her voice, sharp with sudden panic, saying, "Wait, that's not—" But I was already gone. The valet brought my car around within minutes. I'd tipped him well when we arrived, knowing I might need a quick exit. I'd learned to always have an exit strategy. Always keep the keys in your pocket. Always park where you can leave without asking permission. I drove home in silence. No music, no podcast, no phone calls. Just the sound of the engine and the rhythm of my own breathing, in and out, counting to 4, each time the way my therapist had taught me years ago. The house was dark when I arrived, our house, though it had stopped feeling like ours somewhere along the way and started feeling like a place where I stored my things in between. Being reminded that I wasn't enough, I didn't turn on the lights. Instead, I walked through the kitchen, past the living room with its carefully arranged furniture and framed photos of her achievements, down the hallway to the room she thought was just my office. It was my office. That part was true. What she didn't know was what I'd been doing in here for the past 4 years. I opened the closet, the one she never looked in because she'd never needed to, never wanted to, and pulled out the 3 boxes I'd kept on the top shelf, hidden behind old textbooks and files she assumed were just clutter I was too sentimental to throw away. Then I started packing. Not my clothes, not yet. I packed the evidence first. The contracts went into the first box. Every single one, organized chronologically in folders I'd color-coded months ago. The NDAs, the licensing agreements, the partnership paperwork, the patent filings, all of it signed, notarized, filed with the appropriate agencies, completely legal and absolutely real. I remember the day I filed the first patent. It was 4 years ago, almost to the day. She'd been in her second year at the academy, coming home exhausted every weekend, collapsing onto the couch and telling me about her week while I made dinner and listened and asked questions and pretended that my own week hadn't been just as demanding in different ways. I'd spent 6 months developing the algorithm, 6 months of 18-hour days, of testing and retesting, of failure after failure, until finally, suddenly, it worked. It worked better than I'd imagined it could. And I'd sat in this office at 3 in the morning, staring at the screen and watching the numbers align in ways that would change everything, and I'd wanted to wake her up. I'd wanted to shake her awake and show her what I'd done and celebrate together the way couples are supposed to celebrate each other's victories, but I didn't. Because the last time I'd tried to tell her about my work, about the consulting contract I'd landed with a major defense contractor, ironically enough, she'd patted my hand and said, "That's nice, honey. Maybe it'll turn into something real eventually." Something real. As if the 6-figure contract I'd just signed wasn't real. As if the work I was doing wasn't real. As if I wasn't real unless my achievements looked like hers. So I filed the patent alone, celebrated alone, built my company alone, and I told myself it was fine. that I was supporting her dreams and that was enough. That my turn would come later after she graduated, after things calmed down, after she had the mental space to see me as something other than the person who did the grocery shopping and remembered to pay the bills. I told myself a lot of things. The financial statements went into the second box, bank statements dating back 7 years, showing the steady accumulation of wealth from contracts and royalties and investments. Property deeds for the commercial building I'd purchased 2 years ago, the one generating rental income she knew nothing about. Stock portfolios, retirement accounts, trust documents. I'd been careful, meticulous even. Everything in my name only, or in the name of my LLC. Everything properly documented and legally separate, not because I was planning for divorce, or maybe I was subconsciously even back then, but because I'd learned early in our marriage that she had strong opinions about our money and how it should be spent, and those opinions didn't include acknowledging that I was generating most of it. The prenup had been her idea. She'd insisted on it before the wedding, worried that if something happened to her in the line of duty, her military benefits and survivor payments wouldn't get tangled up in marital property disputes. Her father had recommended it. Her lawyer had drafted it. I'd signed it without argument because I had my own assets to protect and saw no reason to fight about it. Best decision I ever made, as it turned out. The third box was for everything else. The emails from her that I'd printed out, the ones where she'd called me her little house husband and joked about me finally getting a real job. The text messages to her friends that I'd seen when she left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, the ones where she called me dead weight and said she was basically single anyway. The photos from family events where her relatives posed with her and cropped me out before posting them online. I hadn't been snooping, not really. The phone had been sitting there, face up, messages appearing on the screen. The emails had been ones she'd CC'd me on, as if she wanted me to know what she really thought. The photos had been public posts I'd seen while scrolling through social media late at night when I couldn't sleep. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being observant. There's a difference. I added other things to that third box, too. The birthday card from her mother that had been addressed only to her, even though we'd been married for 3 years at that point. The Christmas presents from her family that year, we spent the holidays with them. Everyone had gotten me generic gift cards, while she'd received thoughtful, personal gifts that showed they'd actually paid attention to who she was. The program from her officer promotion ceremony where my name was misspelled in the family in attendance section. The invitation to her brother's wedding where I was listed as "and guest" instead of by name. The photo album from her academy graduation where I appeared in exactly 3 pictures out of 200, always in the background, always slightly out of focus. It was a collection of erasures, of all the ways, big and small, that her family and friends, and eventually she herself, had made it clear that I was temporary, optional, easily forgotten. By the time I heard her car in the driveway, everything was packed and waiting by the front door. 3 boxes stacked neatly, each labeled in my careful handwriting. Evidence, financial records, personal. I sat on the couch in the dark and waited. She came in calling my name. Not angry yet, just confused, probably embarrassed, definitely expecting me to either be sulking in the bedroom or willing to have a conversation about how I'd overreacted. "Hey, can we talk about what happened?" she called from the entryway. "I know you're upset, but—" She stopped when she saw me sitting there. Stopped when she saw the boxes. "What's this?" She gestured at them, her voice losing its conciliatory edge. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said simply. She laughed, but it was a different kind of laugh now, uncertain, defensive. "You're leaving? Over a joke?" "Seriously?" It wasn't a joke. Of course it was a joke. Everyone was laughing. "You're just being sensitive." "It wasn't a joke," I repeated, and something in my tone must have registered because she stopped talking. And even if it was, that's the problem. You really think publicly humiliating your husband is funny. You really believe the person who's supported you through every step of this journey deserves to be reduced to a punchline at the dinner he organized and paid for. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. I stood up. You meant exactly that. It's not the first time either. It's just the first time you said it out loud in front of that many people. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You've been calling me a deadbeat for 3 years. I continued, my voice calm in a way that seemed to unsettle her more than yelling would have. To my face, to your friends, to your family. You've introduced me to your colleagues as my unemployed husband. You've made comments about how I must be nice to not have any responsibilities. You've joked about how you're the real breadwinner and how I'm living the dream by doing nothing all day. That's not, I never, you did, you have, repeatedly. I picked up the top box, and I let it happen because I loved you, because I thought you were just stressed from school, because I told myself that once you graduated, once you weren't under so much pressure, things would get better. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and wondered when I'd stopped recognizing the person staring back. But tonight I realized something. Things aren't going to get better. This is who you are now. Someone who values me so little that you'll sacrifice my dignity for applause. Where are you even going? She was angry now. I could hear it creeping into her voice. You don't have anywhere to go. You don't have... I have plenty, I said quietly. That's what you never bothered to find out. I picked up the second box and stacked it on top of the first. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, grabbing the third box and heading toward the door, that you're about to find out exactly what no degree, no plan, and living off your income actually looks like when I'm not around to be your punchline anymore. You can't just leave. Watch me. We're married. We have to talk about this. We are married, I agreed, pausing at the door. Which means in about 3 days, you're going to get a visit from my lawyer. And then we won't be married anymore. Your lawyer? She actually laughed again, bitter and disbelieving. With what money? How are you going to pay for a lawyer? I smiled then. A real smile this time, not the fake one I'd been wearing for years. You really have no idea, do you? And then I left. I didn't go far that first night. Just to a hotel downtown, one of the nicer ones with a view of the harbor and sheets that cost more than our mortgage payment. I checked in under my own name, my full legal name, the one on all those contracts she'd never seen, and ordered room service. Steak, a good bottle of wine, chocolate cake for dessert. I sat by the window and ate slowly, watching the city lights reflect off the water, and felt the weight I'd been carrying for 3 years start to lift. My phone buzzed, multiple times. Calls from her, texts asking where I was, messages that started as demands and slowly morphed into apologies as the night wore on and I didn't respond. I didn't block her number. That would have been petty. I just turned off notifications and went to sleep in a bed that was just mine. The next morning, I woke up early, a habit from years of maintaining a schedule even when nobody knew what that schedule was, and made a list. First, lawyer. I already had one on retainer, had for 2 years actually, but I needed to move forward with the paperwork. The divorce would be straightforward enough given the prenup we'd signed, the one she'd insisted on because she was protecting her military benefits. And I had agreed to because I had plenty of my own assets to protect and saw no reason to argue about it. Second, accountant. I needed to make sure everything was properly separated, documented, and legally airtight. No joint accounts to untangle, no shared properties to divide, just my things and her things with a very clear line down the middle. Third, real estate agent. The house was in both our names, but I'd paid the down payment from my personal account, something I could prove with bank statements and wire transfers. I'd be buying her out or forcing a sale, whichever made more sense financially. Fourth, my team. I'd been running my business quietly for 4 years, but it was time to make some noise. Time to stop hiding behind NDAs and privacy concerns and start actually existing in the world as myself instead of as her disappointing husband. I spent the morning making calls. By noon, I had appointments scheduled for every item on my list. By evening, I had a temporary apartment lined up, a furnished place with a month-to-month lease in a building with a doorman and security, because I had a feeling things were about to get complicated. My phone kept buzzing. Her messages had evolved from apologies to anger to confusion. Where are you? We need to talk about this like adults. You're being ridiculous. Fine, ignore me then. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Can we please just talk? You're scaring me. At least tell me you're okay. I responded to the last one, just 4 words. I'm fine. Talk soon. Then I went back to my list. The lawyer's office was in a building I'd been to before, during the setup phase when we were drafting the initial contracts and agreements. Marcus Reeves was his name, a man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of calm competence that came from 3 decades of handling high-stakes divorces and business dissolutions. He looked at me over his reading glasses when I walked in. "I was wondering when I'd see you again," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "From the expression on your face, I'm guessing we're not here to draft an anniversary gift trust." "Divorce," I said simply. "As clean and fast as possible." He nodded, pulled out a file, my file, I realized, one he'd been maintaining all along, and started taking notes. "Contested or uncontested?" "Uncontested. If she's smart, contested if she tries to fight the prenup. She won't win if she fights it. You know that, right? We wrote it specifically to be ironclad." "I know, but she might try anyway, and I want to be prepared for that possibility." Marcus nodded again, making more notes. "Grounds? Irreconcilable differences. Keep it simple. Timeline. However fast you can make it happen without cutting corners. I want everything documented properly, everything legal, everything by the book." "Good." He looked up. "And the business disclosures?" That was the question I'd been waiting for. "Everything," I said. "Full financial disclosure, every LLC, every patent, every licensing agreement, every investment portfolio, every property deed. I want her to see exactly what she never bothered to look at." Marcus almost smiled, almost. "That's going to be quite a revelation." "That's the point." We spent the next 2 hours going through details. Marcus pulled out documents I'd signed over the past few years, contracts and agreements and amendments that told the story of a business empire built in silence. "You've done well for yourself," Marcus said at one point, reviewing a particularly lucrative licensing agreement. "Better than most people realize." "That's been the problem," I said. He looked at me over those reading glasses again. "You know, most people in your situation would have led with the money, would have made sure their spouse knew exactly what they were bringing to the table. I didn't want her to love me for the money, and instead she didn't love you at all." He said it matter-of-factly, not cruel, just honest. At least not in any way that mattered. I didn't argue with him. What was the point? He was right. By the time I left his office, the paperwork was already in motion. She'd have the divorce petition delivered within 72 hours, along with a complete financial disclosure statement that would answer every question she'd never asked. My accountant appointment was shorter, just a matter of confirming that everything was properly documented and separated. Margaret Chen had been handling my business finances for 3 years, ever since the company started generating serious revenue. She was thorough, discreet, and had never once asked why my spouse didn't seem to know about her existence. "You're sure about this?" she asked, reviewing the separation of assets. "Divorce is final. There's no taking it back once it's done." "I'm sure." "And you're comfortable with the financial implications? The property division, There's nothing to divide," I interrupted. "The prenup covers everything. My assets stay mine. Her assets stay hers. Clean split." "What about the house?" "I paid the down payment. I can prove it. I'll either buy her out or we'll sell and split the proceeds minus my initial investment." Margaret made a note. "And she has no claim to your business income?" "None. The company was established before the marriage, funded entirely by my personal investments, and the prenup specifically excludes business assets." "She's going to be surprised." "That's her problem, not mine." The real estate meeting took longer, but only because we had to discuss market conditions and timing. The house would sell easily. It was in a good neighborhood, well-maintained, and I'd done most of the renovations myself over the past few years. That had been another point of contention. She'd wanted to hire contractors for everything. New kitchen, refinished floors, updated bathrooms. I'd done it all myself instead, partly to save money and partly because I enjoyed the work. Enjoyed building something tangible with my own hands. She'd complained about it constantly, said it was taking too long, that the results weren't professional looking, that we should just pay someone who knew what they were doing. Then her friends came over and raved about the renovations, asked who our contractor was, praised the craftsmanship and attention to detail. She never gave me credit for any of it, just smiled and changed the subject. "Your wife okay with selling?" the agent asked, clearly sensing there was a story here. "She will be," I said. "Eventually." By the time I got back to my hotel room that evening, I was exhausted. Not the bad kind of exhaustion, though. The good kind. The kind that comes from actually doing something instead of just enduring something. I ordered room service again and ate while going through emails on my laptop. My business partners were thrilled that I was finally ready to go public with our work. The tech blogs would love the story once they got wind of it. a nobody who'd been quietly revolutionizing predictive modeling software, while his military wife called him a deadbeat. It practically wrote its own headline. But I wasn't doing this for headlines. I was doing this because I was tired of being invisible. There was an email from David Chen, my CTO, and one of the first people I'd brought onto the team. We'd met at a conference 5 years ago, back when I was still developing the initial algorithms, and he was working for one of the big tech giants. We'd stayed in touch, and when I was ready to build out the company, he'd been my first call. "Heard you're finally going public," his email read. "About damn time. The team's been wondering when you'd stop hiding in the shadows. We've built something incredible. Time to let people know about it." He was right. We had built something incredible. The software we'd developed was powering logistics systems for half a dozen Fortune 500 companies. Military applications, civilian supply chains, disaster response coordination. Our algorithms could predict bottlenecks and optimize routing in real time, saving millions in operational costs and, in some cases, literally saving lives by getting critical supplies where they needed to be faster. We held 17 patents between the core technology and its various applications. We had 43 employees across 3 offices. Our revenue last year had been north of 30 million, with profit margins that made established tech companies jealous. And my wife thought I was unemployed. I responded to David's email. "Team meeting next week. Time to make some announcements." Then I opened a message from Sarah Kim, our head of business development. She'd been pushing me for months to raise our profile, to start attending industry conferences under our own name instead of white labeling our technology for other companies. "I've got 3 speaking requests for you," her email said. Tech Summit in Austin, Defense Innovation Conference in and the Global Logistics Forum in Singapore, all in the next 6 months, all offering keynote slots. Say yes to all of them, please. I typed out a reply. Yes to all 3. Let's also start putting together a proper press kit. Time to exist publicly. Her response came back within minutes. "Finally, what changed?" I stared at that question for a long moment. What had changed? I'd stopped being willing to disappear for someone who'd never appreciated my presence in the first place. "Long story," I typed back. "Tell you at the team meeting." The next morning, I moved into the apartment. It was smaller than the house, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every dish in the cabinet, every book on the shelf, all mine, chosen by me, arranged the way I wanted. I unpacked the 3 boxes methodically. The evidence box went into a locked filing cabinet. The financial records got their own cabinet. The personal items, those painful reminders of who I'd let myself become, went into a drawer I didn't plan on opening again. Then I set up my real office, the one where I could actually work without hiding what I was doing. Triple monitors, mechanical keyboard, ergonomic chair that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything I needed to run a software company that most people had never heard of, but that their favorite apps couldn't function without. The irony wasn't lost on me. While she'd been training to defend the nation, I'd been building the infrastructure that half the military's logistics software ran on. While she'd been earning her degree and her medals, I'd been earning royalties from patents that had made me wealthier than she could imagine on a lieutenant's salary. But I'd kept quiet about it because I'd loved her, because I'd wanted her to have her moment, her achievement, her pride in doing something that mattered. I just hadn't realized that her doing something that mattered required me to matter less. On the 3rd day, I got a call from Marcus. "She's been served," he said. "And judging from the 17 calls I've received from her in the past hour, she's read the financial disclosure. And I think you should prepare for some very angry conversations in the near future. She can be as angry as she wants. It doesn't change the facts." "No," Marcus agreed, "and it doesn't. But fury makes people do stupid things. Be prepared for that." I thanked him and hung up. She called exactly 4 minutes later. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Not to be petty, but because I needed those 3 rings to steady myself. "Hello? What the fuck is this?" Her voice was raw with emotion. Anger, yes, but underneath it, something else. Something that might have been betrayal, or might have been shock, or might have been the dawning realization that she'd made a catastrophic mistake. "It's exactly what it says it is. Financial disclosure for the divorce proceedings. This says She paused, and I heard papers rustling. This says you have over $8 million in assets, 17 patents, a software company with 43 employees, properties in 3 states, investment portfolios that, Jesus Christ, how is any of this possible? It's possible because I've been working for the past 7 years, building something, creating something that matters. You told me you were between jobs. No, I corrected quietly. You assumed I was between. You assumed I was doing nothing. You never asked what I actually did with my time. You let me believe. I let you believe whatever you wanted to believe because every time I tried to tell you about my work, you changed the subject. Every time I mentioned a meeting or a deadline or a contract negotiation, you made a joke about my little projects. Every time I tried to share my achievements, you reminded me that your job was more important because it involved real sacrifice. The line went silent. I could hear her breathing, sharp and fast, and I wondered if she was crying. Part of me wanted to ask. Part of me wanted to soften this moment, to make it less painful for both of us. But the larger part of me remembered sitting at that table, fork in hand, while an entire room laughed at her joke about my worthlessness. You made me feel like shit, she finally said, her voice breaking. For years, you let me think I was the only one contributing to this marriage. You let me carry all that pressure, all that stress of being the breadwinner. I didn't let you do anything. You chose to believe you were carrying us. You chose to treat me like I was worthless. You chose to make jokes at my expense and introduce me as your unemployed burden and act like my existence was something you had to tolerate rather than something you chose. That's not fair. You humiliated me at my own expense at a dinner I paid for. My voice rose for the first time, and I had to pause to breathe, count to 4, in and out, the way my therapist had taught me. You stood in front of your entire graduating class and your commanding officers and your family and reduced me to a punchline. Not in private, not in a moment of frustration, in public, deliberately, for laughs. I thought you'd laugh too. I thought we had that kind of relationship where we could joke about. We never had that kind of relationship. You just never paid enough attention to notice. More silence. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice was smaller now, stripped of its anger. If you had all this, why didn't you just tell me? That was the question, wasn't it? The one I'd been asking myself for 3 years. I thought about all the times I'd tried, all the aborted conversations, the dismissed mentions, the moments when I'd opened my mouth to share something about my work and seen her eyes glaze over before I'd finished the first sentence. Because I wanted you to love me anyway, I said finally. I wanted to be enough without the money or the patents or the company. I wanted to be valuable to you as a person, not as a bank account. I did love you. I do love you. No, I said quietly, but you love the idea of me. The supportive husband who exists in the background of your achievements. The person who asks how your day was and makes dinner and doesn't require any emotional energy to maintain. That's what you love, but you don't love me. You've never bothered to know me well enough to love me. I could hear her crying now, and part of me, the part that had loved her for 7 years, wanted to comfort her, wanted to say it was okay, that we could work it out, that maybe I was being too harsh, but I didn't, because it wasn't okay. And we couldn't work it out. And I wasn't being harsh, I was being honest for the first time in years. Do you remember the night we met? I asked suddenly. The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her crying paused. What? The night we met? Do you remember it? Of course I remember it. At that party, we talked for hours. What did we talk about? Another pause. I don't know. Everything. School, dreams, life. Be specific, I pressed. What did I tell you about myself that night? You were working on some startup thing, something with computers. I told you about the algorithm I was developing, I said quietly. I spent an hour explaining how predictive modeling could revolutionize supply chain management. I told you about the patents I was planning to file, the company I wanted to build, the problems I thought I could solve. And you listened, really listened, asked questions, seemed genuinely interested. I paused, remembering that night. How excited I'd been to meet someone who seemed to understand, who seemed to care. That's why I fell in love with you, I continued. Because you saw me, you saw what I was trying to build, and you thought it mattered. You made me feel like I mattered. I did, I do think you matter. When? The word came out harder than I intended. When was the last time you asked about my work? When was the last time you wanted to hear about a breakthrough or a new contract or a problem I was trying to solve? Silence. I'll tell you when, I said. 3 years ago, right after you enlisted, you came home from your first week of training, exhausted and exhilarated, and I tried to tell you about the defense contract I just landed. Do you remember what you said? I don't. You said, "That's nice, honey, but can we talk about something real?" I just spent a week learning how to actually contribute to national security. I heard my voice crack slightly. Something real. As if what I did wasn't real. As if my work didn't matter because it wasn't in uniform. I was tired. I didn't mean, you meant it, I interrupted. And you've meant it every time since. Every joke about me being unemployed, every introduction that reduced me to a burden, every time you dismissed my work as cute or sweet or one of his little projects. You meant all of it. She was crying harder now, and I realized I was crying too. Tears running down my face in the empty apartment, phone pressed to my ear, having the conversation I should have demanded 3 years ago. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." I didn't realize, I didn't know. That's the problem, I said gently. You didn't know because you never asked. You never bothered to look past your assumptions to see who I actually was. Can we fix this? Please. I'll do better, No. The word hung in the air between us. Final and irrevocable. The divorce is happening, I continued. You can contest it if you want, but the prenup is solid and the grounds are legitimate. We can do this amicably, or we can do it the hard way. Either way, we're doing it. Just like that? 7 years and you're just done? I was done 3 years ago, I said. I just didn't realize it until you made that joke. It was just a joke. It was the truth you've been too cowardly to say out loud until you had an audience to laugh with you. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding. But underneath the adrenaline and the anger and the grief, I felt something else. Relief. The next few weeks were a blur of appointments and paperwork and difficult conversations. Her family tried to reach out. Her mother called twice. Her brother sent several emails. Her father left a voicemail that was equal parts guilt trip and demand that I be a man about the situation. Her mother's message was the hardest to ignore. I don't know what happened between you two, she said, her voice tight with emotion, but she's devastated. She's my daughter, and I love her, but I want you to know that I never thought you were unemployed or unsuccessful or whatever she told people. I always knew you were doing something, working on something. I should have asked more about it. I should have stood up for you when people made jokes. I'm sorry I didn't. I almost called her back, almost explained everything. But what would be the point? She was going to take her daughter's side, regardless, as she should. I didn't need her understanding or her apology. Her brother's emails were less sympathetic. You're really going to throw away a marriage over hurt feelings? Grow up. She made a joke. People make jokes. That's what couples do. I deleted those without responding. Her father's voicemail was exactly what I expected. I don't know what your game is, he said, but if you think you're going to take advantage of my daughter financially, you've got another thing coming. She sacrificed for this country while you sat at home doing God knows what. You owe her. Understand? You owe her. I saved that message. Didn't respond, but saved it. Just in case I needed a reminder later that leaving had been the right choice. My lawyer handled the legal communications, my accountant handled the financial disclosures, my real estate agent handled the house sale. I handled exactly what I needed to handle and nothing more. She tried several more times to talk to me. Sometimes angry, sometimes apologetic, sometimes desperate. She showed up at my apartment building twice before the doorman started refusing to let her up without my permission. She sent emails ranging from furious accusations to tear-stained confessions. One email in particular stood out. It arrived late at night, 2 weeks after I'd moved out, with the subject line, "Things I Should Have Asked." What was it like when you filed your first patent? Were you excited? Scared? Did you want to celebrate with someone? Did you want to celebrate with me? What does your office look like now that you don't have to hide what you're doing? Do you have pictures of us there? Or did you take them all down? What's your favorite part of your work? What problems are you most excited about solving? What keeps you up at night? The good kind of keeping up, where you can't stop thinking about something because it's so interesting. Who are your business partners? What are their names? What are they like? Do they make you laugh? Do they understand you better than I did? When did you stop trying to tell me about your work? Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment when you realized I wasn't listening? How many times did I hurt you before the dinner? How many little cuts that I didn't notice, but that you felt every single time? Do you still love me at all, even a little? Or did I kill that completely? I should have asked these questions years ago. I should have known the answers. I should have cared enough to find out. I'm sorry I didn't. I'm sorry I never really saw you. I read that email 3 times, then I closed it without responding. Because she was right. She should have asked those questions years ago. And the fact that she was asking them now, after I'd already left, didn't change anything. It was too late for questions. 4 weeks after the dinner, my company officially went public with our client list. Not flashy, just a quiet update to our website and a few press releases to tech publications. Stealth tech company behind major logistics platforms emerges from shadows. Read one headline. The algorithm powering your supply chain. Meet the team that built it. Read another. From obscurity to omnipresence. How one company quietly changed everything. Read a third. Within days, my LinkedIn exploded with connection requests. My email filled with interview requests. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with reporters wanting to know why a successful software CEO had been living in obscurity while his military wife called him unemployed. The story was too good for them to resist. They all wanted the narrative. Wronged husband reveals secret success to embarrass ungrateful wife. Revenge through revelation, justice through exposure. I turned down every single interview request. Because that wasn't the story. Or rather, it was a story but it wasn't mine. My story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving her wrong or humiliating her the way she'd humiliated me. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, about stopping the performance of being less than I was, about refusing to shrink myself to make someone else feel bigger. But one journalist was persistent. Her name was Michelle Torres, and she'd been covering the tech industry for 20 years. She sent me 3 emails over the course of 2 weeks, each one more thoughtful and less sensational than the typical media inquiries I was getting. Her third email got my attention. I understand why you're declining interviews. The story everyone wants to tell isn't the story worth telling. They want drama and revenge and schadenfreude. They want a villain and a hero and a satisfying conclusion where the underestimated genius gets the last laugh. But I think there's a different story here. One about the cost of invisibility, about what happens when we value certain kinds of work over others, about marriages that fail not because of infidelity or abuse, but because one person stops seeing the other as fully human. I'd like to tell that story, if you're interested. Not a hit piece on your ex-wife, not a puff piece about your success. Just an honest exploration of what it means to be systematically undervalued by the person who's supposed to value you most. If you're not interested, I understand, but the offer stands. I read that email on a Friday evening, sitting in my apartment with a glass of whiskey and a view of the city lights. Then I wrote back, "Coffee next week, let's talk." Michelle met me at a cafe near my office. She was in her 40s with gray-streaked hair, pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything without judgment. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said, pulling out a notebook. "I promise this isn't an ambush interview." "I know. I read your work before I agreed to meet. You're better than most." She smiled slightly. "That's a low bar, but I'll take it." We talked for 3 hours. Not about the dinner, though we touched on it. Not about the divorce, though that came up too. Mostly, we talked about visibility and value and the different ways society measures worth. "Here's what I don't understand," Michelle said at one point. "You had all this success, all this money, all this proof of your value. Why not just show her? Why not force her to see what you'd accomplished?" "Because I didn't want to win an argument," I said. "I wanted to be known. And you can't force someone to know you. They either care enough to find out or they don't." She didn't. No, she didn't. Michelle made a note. "Do you think it would have made a difference? If she'd known about the company, the patents, the money?" I thought about that, really thought about it. "Maybe in the short term," I said finally. "Maybe she would have been impressed or proud or at least less dismissive, but in the long term, no." Because the problem wasn't that she didn't know about my success. The problem was that she didn't care who I was as a person. The money would have changed how she introduced me at parties. But it wouldn't have changed the fact that she never asked what I thought about or what I dreamed about or what made me feel alive. That's remarkably clear-eyed of you. I've had a lot of therapy, I said wryly. She laughed. Haven't we all? We talked more about the nature of value, about how different kinds of work get recognized or ignored, about the weird hierarchy that places military service above most civilian achievements, even when those civilian achievements might be equally or more impactful. I'm not saying military service isn't valuable, I clarified. It is. It's necessary and difficult and worthy of respect. But so is building infrastructure that saves lives. So is creating algorithms that optimize disaster response. So is doing any work that makes the world function better. But one looks more heroic than the other. Exactly. One comes with a uniform and medals and automatic respect. The other comes with patents and licensing agreements and most people not knowing you exist. Michelle nodded. And your wife valued the visible heroism over the invisible impact. She valued what made her look good, what fit into her narrative of being the successful one, the important one, the one who mattered. That must have been lonely. I felt something catch in my throat. Yeah, it was. The article came out 3 weeks later. It was fair, balanced, and focused more on the work than the drama. Michelle interviewed several people from my company, a few industry experts who explained why our technology mattered, and surprisingly, my ex-wife. I didn't know she'd agreed to be interviewed until I saw the article. But there she was, quoted extensively. I thought I knew him. I really did. I thought I knew everything important about our relationship, our life together, our future. But I didn't know him at all. I knew his habits and his routines and the ways he made my life easier, but I never bothered to learn who he actually was underneath all of that. I never asked the right questions. I never listened when he tried to tell me. And by the time I realized how badly I'd failed him, it was too late. The article also included this. She acknowledges that her behavior at the graduation dinner, publicly introducing her husband as unemployed and living off her income, was the culmination of years of small dismissals and assumptions. I thought it was funny, she says. I thought we had the kind of relationship where we could joke about that kind of thing, but we didn't. We never did. I just never paid enough attention to notice. Reading her words in print felt strange. Part vindication, part grief, part something I couldn't quite name. The article ended with a question Michelle had asked me. What do you wish more people understood about success and visibility? My answer was printed in full. I wish people understood that the most important work is often invisible. That the people who make your life function smoothly, whether they're writing code or managing logistics or caring for others, are often doing incredibly complex, valuable things that you never see. And I wish people understood that loving someone means being curious about them, really curious, not just tolerating their presence or appreciating what they do for you, but actively wanting to know who they are and what matters to them. If you love someone, but you can't describe their dreams or their fears or their passions, then you don't actually know them. And if you don't know them, you're not really loving them. You're loving the idea of them, the convenient fiction, the supporting character in your story, but you're not loving the actual person. The article went viral in certain circles. Tech Twitter loved it. Military forums had mixed reactions, some supportive, some defensive, some arguing that I was being too hard on service members who were under incredible pressure. I didn't engage with any of it. I'd said what I needed to say. The rest was just noise. 6 months after the dinner, I ran into her commanding officer at a coffee shop near my new apartment. The colonel who'd laughed and slapped the table when she made her joke. He recognized me immediately. Had the grace to look uncomfortable. I owe you an apology, he said, not bothering with small talk. We all do. She never told us who you actually were. She didn't know who I actually was, I said simply. That was the problem. He nodded, understanding more than I'd said. For what it's worth, she's been having a hard time. With the divorce, with the revelation about your work, with the way things ended. I'm sorry to hear that. And I was, genuinely. I didn't wish her pain, even now. Are you? He studied me. Sorry, I mean? I thought about it. Really thought about it. I'm sorry it had to end the way it did, I said finally. I'm sorry she never gave me the chance to be a full person in her eyes. I'm sorry she valued performance over partnership, but am I sorry I left? No, not even a little bit. The colonel nodded again. She asked me to tell you she misses you, if I saw you. Tell her I hope she finds someone who makes her happy, someone she actually sees. What about you? Are you happy? Was I happy? I thought about my apartment with its killer view and its silence that didn't feel lonely anymore, and I thought about my company expanding into new markets. I thought about the patents I was filing and the team I was building and the work I was doing that actually mattered to me. I thought about waking up every morning and not having to smile when I didn't mean it. Yeah, I said, I'm getting there. The colonel bought his coffee and turned to leave, then paused. Can I tell you something off the record? Sure. That night at the dinner when she made that joke, I laughed. We all laughed. And I'm ashamed of that now. Because even if we didn't know the whole story, we should have known better than to laugh at someone being publicly humiliated by their spouse. That's not funny. That's cruel. And I should have been better than that. He looked genuinely remorseful, and I felt something in me soften slightly. Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, I've been using it as a teaching moment with my officers about respect, about dignity, about the kind of people we want to be both in uniform and out of it. That surprised me. Really? Really? Because that night taught me something important. It's easy to respect people who have obvious markers of success: rank, medals, titles, visible achievements. It's harder to respect people whose contributions are less visible. But the harder thing is what makes us better leaders, better people. He extended his hand. I mean it. I'm sorry. I shook his hand, apology accepted. After he left, I sat with my coffee for a long time, thinking about respect and visibility and the ways we measure human worth. The colonel's apology meant more than he probably knew. Not because I needed it, but because it represented something larger. An acknowledgement that the laughter that night had been wrong, that public humiliation isn't funny, even when everyone's joining in. That respect should be the default, not something that needs to be earned through displays of achievement. 8 months after the dinner, I got an email from her. Subject line, I understand now. I almost didn't open it, almost deleted it unread because I didn't owe her my attention anymore and I'd worked hard to move past the anger and the hurt. But curiosity won out. The email was long. Too long, really. Pages of explanation and apology and self-reflection that might have been genuine or might have been another performance. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. But one paragraph stood out. I've been in therapy for 3 months now. My therapist asked me to describe you, and I realized I couldn't. Not really. I could tell her about your routine and your habits and the things you did for me, but I couldn't tell her who you actually were as a person. I couldn't name your dreams or your fears or your passions. I couldn't describe what made you laugh or what kept you up at night or what you thought about when you were alone. And that's when I realized that I'd spent 7 years married to someone I'd never bothered to meet. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I closed the email and started writing a response. Not to her. She didn't need my absolution or my forgiveness or my acknowledgement of her growth. That was between her and herself. I wrote to myself. A letter I'd needed to write for years but had never found the words for. Dear younger me, you're going to meet someone who makes you feel alive and excited and like you've finally found your person. You're going to fall hard and fast, and you're going to do everything you can to support her dreams because that's who you are. But somewhere along the way, you're going to start shrinking. Not all at once, but gradually, like a photograph left in the sun. You're going to stop talking about your own work because she gets uncomfortable when you do. You're going to stop celebrating your achievements because they make her feel competitive rather than proud. You're going to start measuring your worth by how well you support her rather than by what you're building for yourself. And one day, she's going to make a joke at your expense in front of a room full of people, and you're going to realize that the person you've been supporting doesn't actually see you at all. It's going to hurt. God, it's going to hurt in ways you can't imagine. But you're going to walk away. You're going to choose yourself. You're going to stop performing the role of the supportive but unsuccessful husband and start being the successful, capable, valuable person you've always been. And it's going to be the best decision you ever make. Not because she wasn't worth loving, she was. She probably still is, to someone who fits better into her vision of what a partner should be. But because you're worth loving too. And you deserve someone who sees that without needing a financial disclosure statement to prove it. So walk away when you need to. Don't apologize for being more than she expected. Don't shrink yourself to fit into someone else's narrative. And for God's sake, don't wait 7 years to leave a dinner where you're the punchline. You're worth so much more than that. Love you, but wiser. I saved the letter in a file on my computer. Didn't send it anywhere, didn't show it to anyone, just kept it for myself as a reminder. A year after the dinner, my company hit a major milestone. One of our patents was licensed to 3 of the biggest tech companies in the world. The resulting royalty payments meant I could retire comfortably if I wanted to. I didn't want to. Instead, I threw a party. A small one, just my core team and a few close friends I'd made since the divorce. People who knew me as I actually was, not as someone's unsuccessful husband. We rented out a private room at a restaurant. Not the same one. I had no desire to revisit that scene, but a nice one. White tablecloths, flickering candles, servers and gloves. When it came time for speeches, my CTO stood up and said, "Here's to the guy who built something incredible while everyone thought he was doing nothing. And to the fact that he finally stopped hiding it." Everyone raised their glasses. I stood up, raised mine. "To being seen," I said simply. "To being seen," they echoed. And for the first time in years, I felt like I actually was. Visible. Valuable. Seen. Not because I'd proven anything to anyone who doubted me. Not because I'd made her regret her words or her behavior or her fundamental failure to know who I was. But because I'd finally stopped performing for an audience that wasn't watching anyway. 2 years after the dinner, I met someone new. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I was looking for. Just a random encounter at a bookstore where we both reached for the same obscure biography of a tech pioneer. She smiled at me. "You read this stuff too?" "Occupational hazard?" I said. "I'm in tech." "Oh yeah? What do you do?" And I told her. Not everything, not the whole story, but the truth. I ran a software company. I held patents. I built things that mattered. "That's amazing," she said, and sounded like she meant it. "I'd love to hear more about it sometime." Her name was Elena. She was a physical therapist, ran her own practice, had her own achievements and passions and dreams that had nothing to do with whether I validated them. We went for coffee, then dinner, then a weekend trip where she asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers, where she celebrated my achievements without competing with them, where she made space for me to be a whole person instead of a supporting character in her story. The difference was stark, immediate, almost disorienting in how fundamentally different it felt to be with someone who was actually curious about me. On our third date, she asked me to explain one of my patents to her. "Fair warning," I said, "it's pretty technical. Lots of jargon and mathematical concepts." "I know, but I want to understand what you built. Not just that you built something successful, but what it actually is and why it matters." So I explained it. Drew diagrams on a napkin, used analogies to make the concepts accessible, walked her through the problem I'd been trying to solve, and how the solution had evolved. She listened intently, asked clarifying questions, and at the end said, "So basically, you figured out how to make complex systems talk to each other more efficiently. And that ripples out to affect everything from how quickly people get their Amazon packages to how fast emergency supplies reach disaster zones." Essentially, yes. That's incredible. You're literally making the world work better, and most people have no idea you exist. I laughed. "Welcome to software development." "No," she said seriously. "I mean it. That's important work. Just as important as anything done in uniform or in a hospital or anywhere else. Maybe more important, because it's infrastructure. It's the invisible foundation everything else is built on." I felt something shift in my chest. Something that had been tight for years, suddenly loosening. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing it. For seeing me." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Of course I see you. Why wouldn't I?" That question stayed with me for days. Why wouldn't she? Why wouldn't anyone? And the answer, I realized, was that some people chose not to see, chose to maintain their assumptions rather than challenge them, chose comfort over curiosity. My ex-wife had chosen not to see me, had actively maintained her narrative of being the successful one, the important one, the one carrying us both, because that narrative made her feel good about herself. But Elena was different. Elena chose to see, chose curiosity over assumption, chose to know me rather than imagine me. 3 months into the relationship, she met some of my friends. 6 months in, I met her family. 9 months in, she saw me give a presentation at a tech conference and told me afterward that watching me talk about my work was one of the hottest things she'd ever experienced. You light up when you talk about this stuff, she said. It's like watching someone be completely, authentically themselves. I'd never had anyone say that to me before. Never had anyone see my passion for my work as attractive rather than threatening. Never had anyone celebrate my expertise rather than competing with it. A year into the relationship, we were having dinner at her apartment when she asked me something no one had ever asked me before. Can I read your patents? I stared at her. What? Your patents. The ones you filed. I want to understand what you built. Not just the business side, but the actual technical innovations. Can I read them? They're pretty dense, I warned. Lots of technical jargon and legal language. I know, but I want to understand what you do. Really understand it. So I sent her the links. All 17 patents. Thousands of pages of technical documentation and legal filings. She spent the next week reading them, would text me questions at random times. What does this section mean? Can you explain this algorithm? How did you come up with this approach? I'd answer each question in detail, sometimes with follow-up diagrams or supplementary explanations, amazed that someone was actually taking the time to engage with my work at this level. At the end of the week, she showed up at my apartment with a bottle of champagne and a card. The card read, "Congratulations on being brilliant. I'm sorry it took me a week to understand why, but now that I do, I'm even more impressed." I might have cried a little. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Reading all that technical stuff, asking all these questions. You don't need to understand the details of my work to." "To what? Love you?" She smiled. "Maybe not, but I want to know you. All of you. Not just the parts that are easy to understand or convenient to acknowledge. You built something incredible, and I want to know how and why and what it means to you." My ex-wife never asked, I said quietly. "I know." She took my hand. "She told me." I pulled back. "She told you? When did you? How did you?" "She came into my practice 3 months ago. Torn ACL from a training exercise. We got to talking during her sessions. And eventually she figured out who I was dating." She paused. "She asked me to give you a message." My stomach dropped. "What message?" "She said to tell you she's sorry, really sorry, and that she hopes you found someone who sees you the way you deserve to be seen all along." I didn't know what to say to that. "For what it's worth," Elena continued, "I told her I did. See you, I mean. And that I'm grateful she was stupid enough to let you go, because it meant I got to find you." That's when I knew. Not that I loved her, I'd known that for months, but that I could trust her. That she saw me not as a project or a supporting character or a punchline, but as a whole person worthy of being known. "What else did she say?" I asked. My ex-wife. Elena hesitated. "Are you sure you want to know?" "Yeah, I think I do." She said that losing you was the biggest mistake of her life, that she didn't realize what she had until it was gone, that she'd been working on herself, trying to understand what went wrong, trying to be better for the next person she dated. Elena paused. "She also said that she hopes you're happy, that you deserve to be happy, and that she's genuinely glad you found someone who treats you the way she should have." I processed that for a moment. How did she seem when she said all this? "Honest," Elena said. "Sad, but honest. Like she'd really done the work to understand what she'd done wrong." I got the sense that losing you fundamentally changed her understanding of what it means to be in a relationship. "Good," I said, and I meant it, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because growth requires pain sometimes. Requires facing hard truths about yourself and your failures. If she was really doing that work, really trying to be better, then something good had come out of the wreckage of our marriage. "Are you over her?" Elaine asked quietly. "Really over her?" I thought about it carefully before answering. "I'm over who she was," I said finally. "I'm over the marriage we had. I'm over the hurt and the anger and the years of feeling invisible. But I'll probably never be completely over what we could have been if she'd chosen differently. If we'd both chosen differently." "That's fair," Elena said, and "that's honest. But I'm here," I continued, "with you. Completely here. Not holding on to the past or wishing things had gone differently. Just here, grateful for what we have now." She kissed me then, soft and certain, and I felt the last ghost of my marriage fade into something that was just history. Just a part of my story, not the defining chapter. 3 years after the dinner, I got invited to speak at my ex-wife's alma mater. The military academy wanted me to give a keynote about innovation and leadership and building things that matter even when no one's watching. I almost said no, but Elena convinced me to say yes. You have a story worth telling, she said. And not just the tech story, the whole story. About staying true to your work even when people underestimated you, and about building something meaningful in silence and refusing to let other people's perception define your reality. So I accepted the invitation. The lecture hall was packed. 300 cadets, dozens of faculty members, and a handful of distinguished guests, including, I noticed with a strange mixture of feelings, several officers I recognized from that dinner 3 years ago. My ex-wife wasn't there. I'd been told she'd declined the invitation to attend, said it would be too difficult. I respected that. I stood at the podium and looked out at all those eager faces, these people who were training to serve and protect and lead, and I thought about what I wanted to say. I didn't tell them about the dinner. That wasn't the point. Instead, I talked about the difference between visibility and value, about how our society often conflates the two, assuming that if work isn't visible or celebrated or understood by others, it must not matter. But some of the most important work happens in silence, I said, in the background, in the unglamorous hours of problem solving and testing and failing and trying again. And just because people don't see it doesn't mean it's not valuable, doesn't mean it's not changing the world. I talked about the danger of measuring your worth by other people's recognition, about how external validation is addictive, but ultimately hollow if it's not rooted in genuine respect and understanding. You're all training to lead, I continued. And leadership isn't just about inspiring people or giving orders or being the most visible person in the room. It's about seeing the value in others even when it's not obvious, especially when it's not obvious. It's about recognizing that the quietest person on your team might be the one solving the problems you didn't even know existed. I talked about the patents, the software, the company I'd built while people assumed I was doing nothing. But mostly, I talked about the importance of knowing the people you claim to love or lead or work with. You can't lead people you don't see, I said. You can't love people you don't know. And you can't build anything meaningful if you're so focused on your own achievements that you fail to recognize the contributions of the people around you. I shared stories from my company about engineers who'd solved critical problems in ways I never would have thought of, about administrative staff who'd streamlined processes and saved thousands of hours, about the security guard in our building who'd casually mentioned an efficiency issue he'd noticed, leading to a redesign that improved our entire workflow. Every person in your organization has insights you don't have, I said. Every person you lead knows things you don't know. Your job as a leader isn't to have all the answers. It's to create an environment where people feel safe sharing their knowledge, their ideas, their concerns. And you can't do that if you've decided in advance that only certain kinds of contributions matter. The applause when I finished was enthusiastic. Several cadets lined up afterward to ask questions, to get business cards, to tell me their own stories of feeling underestimated or overlooked. But the moment that stuck with me came from one of the officers I recognized from the dinner. The colonel who'd slapped the table and laughed. He waited until everyone else had left, then approached me with his hand extended. "That was a powerful talk," he said, "and I owe you an apology, a real one. Not the half-assed version I gave you at the coffee shop." "You don't owe me anything," I said honestly. "I do, though, because I laughed at you that night. Laughed at the idea of you being unsuccessful and dependent, and I never questioned it. Never thought to ask who you actually were or what you actually did. I just accepted the narrative your wife presented because it was easier than challenging it." He paused, looking uncomfortable but determined. "That's not the kind of officer I want to be, not the kind of leader I want to be. And your talk tonight reminded me that leadership means seeing the whole person, not just the surface story." I shook his hand. "Thank you for that. For what it's worth," he added, "she regrets it. The joke, the assumptions, all of it. She's been trying to be better, to do better. But I don't think she'll ever stop regretting how she treated you." "Good," I said, and I meant it. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because regret meant growth, meant she'd learned something from her mistakes. "Are you happy now?" He added. "Yeah," I said, "I really am." And I was. 4 years after the dinner, I proposed to Elena, not at a fancy restaurant or a scenic overlook or any of the traditional places people propose, and I proposed in her apartment on a random Tuesday while we were doing dishes after a completely ordinary dinner. I want to spend the rest of my life with someone who asks to read my patents, I said, getting down on one knee with soapy hands and no ring because I hadn't planned this at all. She laughed and cried and said yes before I even finished the sentence. We got married 6 months later. Small ceremony, just close friends and family. No big production, no speeches, no moments where anyone was a punchline. Just two people who saw each other completely, choosing to keep seeing each other for the rest of their lives. My ex-wife sent a card. Simple, elegant, with a handwritten note. Congratulations, I mean that. You deserve someone who knows how lucky they are to have you. I showed it to Elena. That's generous of her, she said. Yeah, I agreed. It is. We never responded to the card. There was nothing to say. The past was the past, and we were both exactly where we needed to be. 5 years after the dinner, a journalist contacted me. Not Michelle Torres this time, but someone new. She was writing a piece about successful entrepreneurs who'd operated in obscurity before going public with their work. I heard a rumor, she said, that you ran your company for years while your spouse thought you were unemployed. Is that true? Not quite, I said. She thought I was unsuccessful. There's a difference. What's the difference? Unsuccessful implies you're trying and failing. I was succeeding quietly. She just never looked closely enough to notice. Why not? The journalist pressed. Why didn't you tell her? I tried, I said simply. She wasn't interested in listening. The journalist wanted to make it a dramatic story. Wronged husband, clueless wife, revenge through success. She kept pushing for details about the dinner, about the divorce, about the moment I got my revenge. I declined to provide them. This isn't a revenge story, I told her. It's a story about refusing to diminish yourself to fit someone else's narrative, about choosing to be seen rather than staying invisible for someone's comfort. That's not revenge. That's self-respect. She pressed harder, but I held firm. Eventually, she gave up and wrote her article without my participation. It was sensationalized and mostly inaccurate, but I didn't care enough to correct it. The people who mattered knew the truth. 6 years after the dinner, Elena and I bought a house. A real house, not a showpiece or an investment, but a home where we planned to build a life together. We were unpacking boxes when I found it. The evidence box from that night. The one I'd packed so carefully, labeled so precisely, stored in a locked cabinet for years. I'd forgotten I still had it. Elena saw me staring at it. What's that? Ghosts, I said. She came over, looked at the label, understood immediately. Do you need to keep it? I thought about it, really thought about it. All the emails and texts and photos documenting my ex-wife's dismissal, all the proof I'd gathered that I was right to leave, right to feel hurt, right to demand better. Did I need to keep it? No, I said finally. I don't think I do. We spent the evening going through it together. Not reading everything, there was no point in reliving that pain, just acknowledging what it was and what it had meant and why I'd needed to save it in the first place. Then we built a fire in our new fireplace and burned it all. Every email, every text message, every painful reminder of a time when I'd let someone make me feel small. We watched it burn, Elena's hand in mine, and I felt the last weight lift. You know what the best revenge is? Elena asked as the flames consumed the last of the papers. Living well, I guessed. Oh, she smiled. It's forgetting you ever needed revenge in the first place. She was right. 7 years after the dinner, 7 years exactly, I realized when I checked the date, I was giving another lecture, this time at a conference for entrepreneurs and innovators, people who were building things that mattered in fields that most people didn't understand. During the Q&A, someone asked me the question I'd been asked 100 times in 100 different ways. What's the most important lesson you've learned in your career? I could have talked about technical strategies or business models or market analysis. I could have given them the expected answer about perseverance or innovation or staying ahead of trends. Instead, I told them the truth. The most important lesson I've learned, I said, is that you can't let other people's perception of you become your reality. People will underestimate you. They'll misunderstand you. They'll make assumptions about your worth based on incomplete information or their own biases or what's most convenient for their narrative. I paused, thinking about that dinner 7 years ago, about the laughter, about the weight of the fork in my hand and the choice I'd made. to walk away. And when that happens, I continued, you have two choices. You can shrink yourself to fit their perception, or you can hold steady and wait for them to catch up to your reality. The first option is easier in the short term. The second option is the only one that lets you live authentically. Someone in the audience raised their hand. What if they never catch up? What if people never see you the way you deserve to be seen? Then you find new people, I said simply. You find people who are willing to actually look, who are interested in knowing you rather than assuming they already do, who value understanding over convenience. I smiled, thinking about Elena at home, probably reading a book in the sunroom we'd just finished renovating together. And you let the ones who weren't willing to look simply fade into your past where they belong. The applause was warm, appreciative, but I barely heard it. Because in that moment, I realized something that had taken 7 years to fully understand. That dinner wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The beginning of refusing to be small. The beginning of demanding to be seen. The beginning of choosing myself with the same devotion I'd once chosen her. That dinner was the night I stopped performing the role of the supportive but unsuccessful husband and started living as the successful, capable, valuable person I'd always been. And that person, the real me, the whole me, the me that existed whether anyone acknowledged it or not, was worth more than any amount of applause or recognition or validation from people who'd never bothered to look past the surface. I went home that night to Elena, who knew my dreams and my fears and my passions. Who could describe what made me laugh and what kept me up at night and what I thought about when I was alone? Who knew me, really knew me? And that knowledge of that being seen completely and chosen anyway was worth more than every achievement, every patent, every milestone my company had ever hit. Because at the end of the day, success isn't measured in dollars or recognition or public acknowledgement. It's measured in whether you're living authentically, whether you're being true to yourself even when no one's watching, whether you're building a life that reflects your values rather than other people's expectations. And by that measure, walking away from that dinner 7 years ago was the most successful thing I'd ever done. Not because it proved her wrong, but because it proved me right. I was worth more than being someone's punchline. I was worth more than shrinking myself for someone else's comfort. I was worth more than staying invisible to avoid threatening someone's ego. I was worth being seen, and I finally was. That night, as I sat in the home I'd built with someone who actually knew me, I thought about that younger version of myself, the one who'd smiled through the humiliation, the one who'd raised his glass and walked away with his dignity intact. I wanted to tell him something. I wanted to tell him that it gets better, that the pain fades, that walking away was the right choice and the brave choice and the only choice that had led to this moment. I wanted to tell him that he was enough, had always been enough, would always be enough regardless of who did or didn't recognize it. But mostly, I wanted to tell him thank you. Thank you for refusing to stay. Thank you for choosing self-respect over comfortable familiarity. And thank you for believing that he deserved better even when better seemed impossible to imagine. That night at the dinner, when I walked away from the laughter and the humiliation and the woman I'd thought I'd spend my life with, I didn't know what would come next. I just knew I couldn't stay. And it turned out that knowing when to leave was the first step toward learning how to truly arrive. 7 years later, I'd finally arrived. Not at some destination of complete success or perfect happiness or total validation, but at a place where I was fully myself, seen, known, valued, and home. And that was enough. More than enough. That was everything.